Welcome back to Ceasefire Violation, the channel where we cut through the noise and talk about global power struggles the way they really are. And today's headline is massive, both literally, in terms of destruction on the battlefield, and politically, in the halls of Washington. US President Donald Trump is back in the spotlight, and this time he isn't just tossing out rhetoric about diplomacy or sanctions. He's making a direct threat to collapse Russia's economy completely. His playbook? A lethal mix of sanctions, tariffs, and, if he can pull it off, a fully coordinated economic strike alongside Europe. Now, you might be wondering, why now? Why this sudden, sharp escalation? Well, the trigger came just hours earlier. Russia launched its largest aerial assault on Ukraine since the war began. We are talking swarms of drones and cruise missiles raining down on Kyiv like it was a target range. These weren't random hits, these were deliberate strikes. Government buildings were shredded by explosions. Fires tore through offices. Even the Cabinet of Ministers complex, Ukraine's central hub of governance, took a direct hit. Rescue crews scrambled through the smoke, trying to drag survivors out from collapsed concrete and twisted steel. At least 4 people lost their lives. Dozens more were rushed to hospitals. And perhaps the most gut-wrenching image of all? A pregnant woman, wounded in the chaos, forced into premature labor. She gave birth in a hospital basement, surrounded by the sounds of sirens and explosions. Imagine that, bringing new life into a world that's literally on fire. That's not a headline. That's human reality. Ukraine's Prime Minister, Yulia Svyridenko, didn't mince words. She called the strike exactly what it was, a crime. Not an accident. Not collateral damage. A deliberate attack on the machinery of the state. President Volodymyr Zelensky, in his nightly address, went even further. He accused Putin of testing the world, testing the patience of the West, testing NATO's red lines, and probing whether international outrage has limits. And judging by Trump's reaction, the US is signaling that its patience is wearing thin. Standing outside the White House, Trump unveiled what he's calling Phase 2. Phase 1 was already brutal. Sanctions that cut Russia off from SWIFT banking systems, frozen assets worth billions, heavy restrictions on exports. But Phase 2? That's a whole new level. Trump is threatening not only deeper sanctions on Moscow, but also secondary tariffs on any country that continues buying Russian oil, gas, or grain. In plain language, don't just punish Russia. Punish anyone who dares to keep Russia's economy alive. The idea is simple: squeeze the Kremlin so hard that it can't pay for the war. Bleed the war chest until Putin is forced to the negotiating table. And he's not bluffing alone. His Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, doubled down in a recent interview, saying Russia's financial system can't survive a synchronized Western crackdown of this scale. And behind closed doors, Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance held a direct call with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. That's not casual chit-chat. That's the kind of behind-the-scenes coordination that usually comes right before something big drops. Washington and Brussels may be preparing the harshest economic package we've seen since this war began. But sanctions are only half the story. In Europe, the debate is getting sharper. Over 24 European states recently pledged to oversee any eventual peace deal in Ukraine. But whispers are growing louder about something far more dangerous: sending Western troops into Ukraine itself. Now, let's pause here, because that's a bombshell. Putin has already called this a red line. He's warned flat out that if NATO boots land on Ukrainian soil, Russia will treat them as legitimate targets. And think about the consequences. That means NATO soldiers and Russian soldiers shooting at each other directly. That's not proxy war anymore. That's head-on confrontation between 2 nuclear powers. That's war, period. Let's take a step back and really zoom out for perspective. Right now, Russia isn't just fighting at the front lines, it's occupying roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory. That's 1/5 of an entire nation under foreign control. Cities that once thrived with culture and commerce are now reduced to rubble. Apartment blocks stand hollowed out, schools destroyed, bridges collapsed. Families have been ripped apart, with millions forced to flee across borders, scattered throughout Europe and beyond. And perhaps the darkest consequence: an entire generation of Ukrainian children is growing up under the constant sound of sirens, drone strikes, and missile attacks. Childhood replaced by fear. Putin is playing the long game here. His gamble is simple: that the West will eventually lose interest, that fatigue will set in, that divisions will grow, and that support for Ukraine will fade away. He's betting that time is on his side. But Trump's message cuts in the opposite direction. Don't slow down, don't compromise. Instead, tighten the screws even further, unleash harsher sanctions, slap tariffs on those who trade with Moscow, and keep turning the pressure until Russia breaks. But here's where things get complicated and messy. Economic warfare isn't some neat, precise tool. It's not a missile you can aim at one target. Sanctions don't just hit Putin's inner circle, they ripple across the entire global economy. Energy prices surge. Gasoline becomes more expensive. Food supply chains are disrupted, making bread, grain, and cooking oil costlier in places far from the battlefield. Inflation eats into household budgets, not just in Europe, but in Asia, Africa, and yes, right here in America. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Russia, despite being hammered with restrictions since 2022, has shown a resilience that many underestimated. Oil? Still selling. Gas? Still finding buyers. Grain? Still moving through ports, sometimes quietly, sometimes with the help of intermediaries. Countries like China, India, Turkey, and even certain buyers in the Middle East have kept Moscow's economy alive, and Washington isn't exactly eager to start sanctioning all of them. So when Trump boldly claims he can drive Russia into full collapse, you have to wonder, is this really a well-thought-out strategy, or is it just tough political talk designed for headlines and sound bites? But let's not forget the real point here. For Ukraine, this isn't some economic chess match played by powerful nations. It's raw, painful survival. Missiles have just ripped through their capital. Families are burying their dead. Hospitals are overflowing with the wounded. A mother, wounded herself, was forced to give birth in the chaos of an air raid. Entire neighborhoods are living night after night with the terror of air raid sirens and the uncertainty of whether their homes will even stand by morning. So while leaders in Washington and Brussels argue over sanctions and tariffs, in Kyiv and Kharkiv and countless smaller towns, the stakes are already life and death. For Ukrainians, every single day is about endurance, about making it through to the next morning. And that's why we're here on Ceasefire Violation, to cut through the noise, to bring you the raw, unfiltered reality of global conflict. Because in this war of missiles, sanctions, and propaganda, truth itself is always the first casualty. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us keep going. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next update. Share this video with friends who need to hear the real story, not the sugar-coated version. And I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Trump's strategy can actually break Russia's economy, or is it just political theater? Drop your comments below, because your perspective matters.